And let me also mute all. Okay, so I'm trying a different kind of layout on my screen, which is multi-speaker view, so that maybe in the recording it'll feature me as opposed to having to look for me among all the other screens. So I'm just experimenting with this to see how this looks. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We continue in chapter 4 of Samuel, and we're continuing with verse 12. The Philistines have the Israelites have just gone to war with the Philistines. 30,000 soldiers were just killed by the Philistines, and the Ark of God was captured by the Philistines, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, were killed. So that fulfills the prophecy that came just a chapter or two before in this book. Okay, so now we continue the story. So we're on page 24 in this edition. Vayaratz ish Binyamin meha ma'aracha vayavo Shilo bayom hahu umadav kruim va'adama al rosho. So a Benjaminite ran from the scene of battle. It says here out of the army. I think it's more of like the camp, I guess the encampment, but an encampment for battle. So whatever that's called, the way the army is set up in the field about to do battle. So that array, that's what he's running from. And he came to Shiloh. Well, he's not running. He's running away. It's running for his life because 30,000 of his fellow soldiers have just been killed. So he's running from the camp, and he comes to Shiloh on that day, and his clothes are torn, and there's dirt on his head. Vayavo vehine Eli Yoshev al hakisei yach derech mitzapeh ki haya libo chared al aron ha'elohim v'ha'ish ba lahagid ba'ir vatizak kol ha'ir. Now the Hebrew is kind of cryptic here, so I want to try translating it without looking at the English translation. So he came, and there's Eli sitting on a chair or on a throne. Yach derech metzapeh. So the asterisk says in the very, very small print there under the text of the verses, it says yad. It should be read as yad. So it's written as yach, but it should be read as yad. So yad derech metzapeh. So does that mean by the road looking out? Okay, so it says in the English, by the wayside watching. Okay, by the road watching. Metzapeh is, more than watching is, it's looking out. Kind of like, it's the same root for Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, Har Hatzofim. So you're looking out, and you're getting like it's like at a rest area, a viewpoint, and you're looking out, and you have like the sign telling you what you're looking at, what you're looking at. That kind of thing. It's an overlook. He's sitting on a chair or a throne by the road, looking out like he's waiting for something, because his heart was trembling for the ark of God. And the man came to tell in the city, and all the city screamed out or cried out. Oh, so so when the man, I guess, said the way the Hebrew is written, it's like he's about to tell something, but it's understood in the English as if he's telling the story of what just happened in battle. So he's coming, he sees Eli by the road, and he goes into the city of Shiloh, tells the story of what happened in battle and how the ark was captured, and the whole city, the people of the city cry out.
Jonah,
Yes?
he rent his clothes and he put,
Already, his clothes were torn, and there's dirt on his head.
was that a mourning, mourning
So
thing?
it's unclear. It's
That's what-
unclear. It's unclear if that was, because he was in battle and that's what happened to him. Like he ran straight. So the impression I have from the text is he's running straight from battle without changing his clothes and washing up. That's what I think. You could read it your way, Bess, that he did that intentionally as a sign of mourning. It's unclear, but we don't know this Benjaminite's intention. So let's go on with the story and see if he's really in mourning or if he's just like running for his life and just telling the story wherever he goes.
I
Yes.
should know this, but is the renting of the clothes, is that already been established, or is that rabbinic?
So it's rabbinic based on Jacob. So in a way, it has already been established since Jacob did it. But was it already an accepted practice so that by the time of the rabbis, rending the clothes is a sign of mourning because they've been doing it for generations? Or did the rabbis come up with the idea and base it on Jacob?
Well, there were a lot of deaths since Jacob, but is that the only
So
time?
Barry, but when trying to answer your question, I don't know if it's accepted practice yet for people to rend their clothes as a sign of mourning. We only have Jacob ripping his garment when he hears the news from his sons that Joseph was eaten by wild animals. So that's the basis for mourners today to rend their clothes. My only question is, was it accepted practice from the time of Jacob for the people of Israel to rend their clothes as a sign of mourning? It's not written elsewhere in the Torah how to mourn. We're told in Leviticus that Kohanim are not allowed to go to the cemetery to take care of their immediate relatives when they die. But we're not told. Is shaving or not shaving a sign of mourning? It's a sign of a Nazirite, but it's so these things that we take for granted as mourning customs are based on things in the Torah. But again, so it just gets to Bess's question. Is he running with torn clothes and dirt on his head as a sign of mourning? Or is it because he's just running straight from battle and that's just what he looks like? Okay, so in other words, sometime, I don't know, let's say in Valley Forge during the Revolutionary War, if George Washington came to survey the troops, would some of the troops have washed up and shaved in order to officially meet George Washington? Or would the soldiers just have been in their current state of mess and meet George Washington? So I don't know. I've never served in the armed forces, so I don't know protocol. During World War II, when Patton went or Eisenhower reviewed the troops, did he review them? He reviewed them after the battle was already over. So did they dress up to greet the Eisenhower or Patton, or were they right, in a mess? So that's the idea here. Okay.
Well, you answered the
Yes.
question. I mean, I knew about Jacob, obviously, but there's a lot of deaths recorded in the Torah, and nowhere else do they talk about renting. So that was what I
Right.
was
The
getting at.
people cried when Aaron died. The people cried when Moses died. People cried when Joshua died, but it doesn't say anything else about what they did.
It
Yes.
says earth on the head is a morning, is that part of
So, so here it's called Adamah. It's usually Afer, ashes. Like Mordechai in the Purim story. He's dressed in sackcloth and ashes, mourning the decree by Haman. And Esther is mortified that he's dressed that way, and tells her servants to go out to Mordechai to change his clothes. So it's Afer, is the word for ashes. That's usually, and in the prophets also, Jeremiah dresses in sackcloth and ashes as a message for the people of Israel. So it's usually the word Afer, not Adamah. Okay, 14. Vayishma Eli et kol hatze'aka, vayomer me kol hahamon hazeh, v'ha'ish mihar v'yavo v'yaged la'Eli. Eli heard the sound of the crying, the screaming, and said, "What is this cacophony?" I think that's the best translation of Hamon, because Hamon means lots of things. So, and cacophony is lots of noise. So what is this cacophonous noise? And the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now, doesn't it look like he already told Eli in verse 13? So, in other words, we're told Eli's already there in 13, and the man's running, but he went to the city. So didn't Eli already hear the story? Or, right, it seems like he already heard it. Why is he the last one to know now? Like, if all the people in the city hear the story, why is Eli the last one to hear?
Based on the translation
Yeah.
that we have, it says, Eli sat upon his seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled with the ark. And when the man came into the city, it never says that
Right.
he said anything to Eli.
Yeah, true. But I don't know. You run by Eli, who's supposed to be like the guy in charge. Like, I don't know. Do you run by the mayor to tell the people of the city what's going on and tell the mayor last? If you see the mayor, don't you see the mayor first and tell him, and then let the mayor decide how to tell the people in the city? I'm just saying, to me, it seems wrong.
Well, Eli has just lost two sons.
Well, he doesn't, but does he know
He
that,
doesn't
or does he know that?
No, he doesn't know that.
I don't know.
And
Maybe he does know that. Maybe the guy told him.
And maybe the man is hesitant to relay that to him.
And so that you tell all the inhabitants of the city, and then you let Eli hear last. I mean, how does he not hear from people in the city? So I just think it's wrong. It just doesn't seem right to me, the order how it's presented here. Okay.
Did he recognize Eli, or because he was in regale?
I would think that the high priest wears special garments that nobody else wears. So yes, he should. And it's not like this is a foreigner. This is a Benjaminite. So even if you don't go to shul regularly, if you go on Yom Kippur, you know how the Kohen is dressed. Okay, so 15. Ve'eli ben tish'im u'shmone shana ve'enav kama ve'lo yachol lir'ot. Now this is unusual also, this Hebrew. Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were, and the Hebrew word is kama. So lakum means to get up, or could be established. What does it mean that his eyes were gotten up or were established? It says here in the English his eyes were set. And whatever that means, it means he's not able to see. V'lo yachol lir'ot. So I'm just saying that this phrase, his eyes were set, it's Alter translates it, his eyes were rigid. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. What kind of affliction is that when your eyes are rigid, you can't see? So it's not explained. So when Isaac is old, back in the Torah, it says his eyes were dimmed. Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like cataracts or something like that. What does this mean? His eyes were rigid. So I don't know what that means. 16. We know about Samson also, that they gouged out his eyes. So now we know why he couldn't see. Okay. 16. Vayomer ha'ish el Eli, Anochi haba min hama'aracha, va'ani min hama'aracha nasti hayom, vayomer mehaya hadavar beni. So the man said to Eli, I am the one who just came from the army, from the battlefield, and I, from the battlefield, have fled today. And he said, that is Eli said, what happened, my son? 17. Vaya'an hamevaser, vayomer, nas Yisrael lifnei plishtim, v'gam magefa gedola hayata ba'am, v'gam shnei banecha metu, Chofni ufinchas, va'aron ha'Elohim nilkacha. The person bearing the news answered. Now, he's called an Ish. He's called Ish Binyamin in verse 12, and then he's just called Ish all the way through 16. Now he's the mevaser, the one who's telling the news. So this is bisorot is modern Hebrew for news, but it's also hadashot, what's new. So just remember being in Israel, and always if you're on a bus at the top of the hour, you hear beep, 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 Hinei Chadashot, and then it goes on. This is the news. This is the latest updates, whatever. So Chadashot is usually the news, but Bisorot Tovot is usually like you're wishing someone good news. You want a good message, a good blessing. So the messenger answers and says, Israel has escaped from before the Philistines. And there was Israel has fled from before the Philistines. And there's also a great plague among the afflicted the nation. And your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, died. And the Ark of God was captured. 18, Vayehi kahaz kiro et aron ha'elohim, vayipol me'al hakisei achoranit, ba'ad yad hasha'ar, vatishaver mafrakto vayamut. Ki zakein ha'ish v'chaved, Vehu shafat et Israel arba'im shana. Now, get a load of this description. So when he mentioned the ark of God, he fell off his chair backwards. So, not when he heard about his sons, but when he heard about the ark, he fell backwards from the chair by the side of the gate, and it says here, his neck was broken. So, Mem Fe Resh Kuf is translated here as neck. Let me just see. His neck bone, Alter translates it. He broke his neck was broken. Like, in other words, he didn't, the tishaver means was broken. So in other words, he didn't do the breaking. The act of falling backwards caused his neck to break, and he died because he was an old man and heavy. So he was a heavy, old 98-year-old. And he judged Israel 40 years. Now, we don't know about Eli being a judge. We know about him being the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. So we'll get into that commentary too, and we'll see if that helps in a moment. Let's just finish the chapter. 19, V'chalato Eshet Pinchas Hara Lalat V'vatishma et hashmu'a El halikach Aron ha'Elohim umet chamiha ve'isha vatichra vateled ki nehefchu aleha tsireha. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Pinchas, was with child near to be delivered. Hara lalat. It's just some of the Hebrew in this chapter is very unusual. It should be hara laledet. That's what I would expect from my knowledge of Hebrew. Hara lalat. She was with child near to be delivered, like she's 9 months pregnant. Maybe she's having contractions, or maybe this news caused her to have contractions, and she heard the herd. That meaning that's, I'm just translating it literally. She heard the news that the ark was captured and that her husband, and that her father-in-law and her husband died, and she bowed herself to give birth. So in other words, she got into position to give birth because her pain suddenly came upon her. Okay? So this tragic news of her husband and her father-in-law dying and the ark being captured. So it's really unclear that the news of the ark would be as bad news as the death of your husband and your father-in-law, but okay. And that for Eli, the capture of the ark was worse news than the death of his sons. Maybe he had time to get used to the death of his sons because he heard the prophecy, but he didn't hear about the ark being captured. So maybe, I don't know, but you're a father. You should, the news of your sons should be more catastrophic, I think, than the ark being taken. The ark being taken is catastrophic news, but you would think your family news would be more catastrophic. 20, Ucha'et muta vatiddaberna hanitzavot aleha al tir'i kiven yaladet velo anta velo shata liba. And as she was dying, the women who were attending her said to her, "Don't be afraid, because you're giving birth to a boy. She didn't answer, and her heart did not feel better. Or she didn't regard it. She wasn't paying attention. She's dying, and it didn't matter to her that she's giving birth to a boy. 21. Vatikra lana'ar chavod lemor gala kavod miyisrael el hilakach aron ha'elohim ve'el chamiha ve'el isha. She called the boy Ichavod, or Ichabod. Okay, Ichabod. Right? Is Ichabod crane? Right? Okay. So yes, Ichabod. That's where you get the name from right here. Ichavod. Ichavod means lacking in honor. It's not really a nice name to give to somebody. So it's interesting that in the time, 250 years ago, 300 years ago, that was a name. But a lot of the pilgrims and founding fathers and that generation and the revolution had names from the Bible. So it's interesting then that I guess the King James English translates it as Ichabod and not lack of honor. Okay, so she called the boy lack of honor, saying that the glory has departed from Israel because the ark of God was captured and because of her father-in-law and her husband. Vatomer gala kavod mi Yisrael ki nilkach aron ha'elohim. So she called the boy Ikavod for this reason, and then she says in verse 22, she says the honor has departed from Israel because the ark of God was captured. Okay, so let's look at the commentary
That
on
was
these,
22 different than 21.
because 21 is why she called the boy Ikavod. 22, she says it out loud. She's not calling the boy, she's just saying it out loud.
But she doesn't mention her father-in-law and her husband.
Right. Okay, so let's back on 24 on the bottom. The death of Eli, man of Benjamin. There is a rabbinic tradition that he is Saul. Okay, so to give us some background about Saul, which the book of Samuel doesn't have for us. The book of Samuel does provide background on David a little bit, but a bunch, but not much about Saul. So perhaps this is a story that introduces Saul. Okay, right column, out of the army, better out of the battle lines. Clothes rent, earth upon his head, signs of mourning. Okay, so Bess, you read ahead when he said, I know, I'm teasing you. His seat by the wayside. That is, yes, Bess?
Are we supposed to admire this Benjamite man who left the scene of the battle?
Right. I don't think it's a matter of admiring him. It's just that the rabbis don't like anonymous people, unnamed people. So that the Midrash comes along to name these people. So I'm trying to think of
Saul.
Yeah.
If it's Saul, it's not necessarily an honorable trait that he has.
Well, it's you get people get to know him because he's telling the news in Shiloh about what happened to the ark, and maybe I don't know, and maybe then he'll be named king shortly to try to get the ark back and to defeat the Philistines. So I don't know. I haven't read the book of Samuel in a while. So let's just for the rabbis, it's a matter of keeping it in mind. Like, because we know that Saul's a Benjaminite. So, oh, here's a Benjaminite man. So maybe this is a backstory. It's convenient for the rabbis to say that this is a backstory. They don't like
But also
Saul.
that,
But they don't
I was
like
just gonna say
Saul
for,
either. Just a second. They don't like Saul either. So whether he looks bad in this story, okay, that could fulfill their part of the understanding of Saul too. Like to get to his, to say more bad things about him. Yes, Barry.
I was just gonna say fleeing after the battle is over is not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, it depends. Was the battle over? Should they have continued to try fighting to get the ark back? So you don't know. You don't know.
There are 30,000 dead bodies. You have to assume that somebody's got to go through them, make sure they're all dead and don't need help. I mean, how many?
So Bess, I have no idea how medics worked back then, and what battle was like in the time of the Bible or ancient times. I, I don't know. I don't know. You're adding a level of humanity that I'm not sure was there in wartime. His seat by the wayside, that is, a seat by the city gate on the road leading to the scene of battle. Some modern commentators have found this explanation difficult on the ground that the messenger first enters the city and publishes the news there, and afterwards makes his way to Eli, which is what I said.
Now,
Yeah,
ahead.
Barry.
Now you were reading ahead.
Right, exactly. If they say Eli was sitting near the gateway, the messenger should have reached him first, and they have either proposed an alteration of the text or suggested that Eli was sitting in his usual position by the outer gate of the tabernacle. But what could be more natural than that the messenger, in his anxiety to bring the evil news to the townspeople, should have hastened past the blind old man in the city gateway and have been compelled afterwards to make his way back to Eli? Yeah, so I don't know. But again, the blind old man, well, he's Eli, and he should be dressed appropriately. He's not dressed like a blind old man. He should be dressed like a high priest. Okay, so that's why there's a problem here that commentators and scholars have with how the order of events is presented. Waiting anxiously for the coming of a runner with news of the battle. 25 were set, that is, his eyes were set. He was now completely blind. Okay. 17, it doesn't help us in understanding exactly what this condition is with the eyes. There's an ascending scale in the order in which the 4 items are reported, reaching a climax in the report of the capture of the ark. Made mention of the ark, defeat in battle was not a unique phenomenon. Of the sudden death of his 2 sons, he had been forewarned. But the loss of the ark was a catastrophic blow, and the news caused Eli to collapse and killed him. Heavy because of his age or because of his bulk. 26 came suddenly. That is about the Eli's daughter-in-law. Literally, were turned. The rendering of AJ follows Mitsudat Tavid. Rashi, less probably, gives the verb its literal interpretation. The shock created an abnormality from which the mother died. And about the time of her death. Note how succinct and tense the narrative is. There are but 2 words in the Hebrew, the phrase being instinct with pathos. Fear not. See the similar circumstance in Genesis 35:17, which is Rachel giving birth to Benjamin. The attempt to comfort her with the good news of the birth of a son was vain. Ichabod, the Hebrew ikavod, no glory. Departed, the Hebrew word means much more. It's an ominous word expressing is gone into exile. Galah. Well, from galut. Galut is exile, so the same root. The ark of God was taken, etc. It's noteworthy that in her dying agony, she gave first thought to the loss of the ark, even above the death of Eli and her husband. The explanation of the name Ichabod, Ichabod, is repeated, this time mentioning only the ark, which was the essence of Israel's glory. Okay, so let's look at altar on these verses. So we're on page 260 in altar. His garments torn and earth on his head. This disheveled appearance is not because of the fighting, but reflects the customary signs of mourning. Okay, so altar and our commentary disagree with me in that I think he's just running straight from battle, but rather it's a sign of mourning. Eli was seated in a chair by the road. Similarly, in chapter 1, he was seated in a chair in the temple. In both instances, a token of his infirmity, his passivity, or incapacity as leader. The Hebrew phrase behind by the road is textually problematic, as is the related phrase attached to the word gate in verse 18. Scholarly opinion differs as to whether Eli is sitting by the road, by the gate, or like David in 2 Samuel 18, above the gate. The last of these possibilities would best explain his breaking his neck when he falls, but it's by no means the inevitable meaning of the Hebrew, and the Hebrew preposition in verse 18 actually indicates through the gate. His heart was trembling over the ark of God. Apprehension over the fate of his scurrilous sons is not mentioned. What is this sound of uproar? Eli's question pointedly and ironically parallels the question asked by the Philistines in verse 6 about the jubilant uproar from the Israelite camp. At the very end of the David story in 1 Kings 1, the usurper Adoniah will ask virtually the same question about an uproar that spells disaster for him and his followers. His eyes were rigid. The idiom for Eli's blindness has a stark finality here that it does not have in chapter 3, verse 2. Presumably, a good deal of time has elapsed since that moment of the young Samuel's dedication as prophet, and the process of blindness is now complete. It is because Eli can see nothing that he must ask with particular urgency about the reason for all the shouting. I am the one who has come from the lines. I from the lines fled today. This odd repetition may reflect a stammer of nervousness or confusion, as Shimon bar Ephrat has proposed. The report of the battle moves from the general indication of the defeat to the admission of a rout, to the death of Eli's 2 sons, and finally to what is assumed to be the worst catastrophe, the capture of the ark. It should be noted that 1 and 2 Samuel are in part organized around a series of inter-echoing scenes in which a messenger brings ill tidings. The bearer of ill tidings to Adoniah at the very end of this long narrative also nervously repeats Vigam, what's more, as he recounts the catastrophe. So just interesting that Alter is pointing out some literary styles that we find in the book of Samuel. So a messenger bearing news, etc. Ron.
Maybe another way to interpret comma, because which is not so pejorative for Eli. So let's suppose that he gives the appearance of being concentrating on something. And as a priest, he would be concentrating on God or some divine aspect of what's going on. So this man is running by and he sees Eli is sitting on the chair, deep concentration, and out of respect for Eli does not disturb him. But he has news that will interest everybody. He runs past Eli, figures, I'll come back when he's finished with whatever he's doing, and then I'll tell Eli what happened.
Okay, so interesting. So you're interpreting his eyes, so einav kama, you're interpreting as his eyes in deep concentration.
It could be. It doesn't say explicitly that he's blind. It doesn't say that his eyes are dim. There are all these other ways of explaining
Yes.
it. looking quickly in Sefaria for comma is like, 60 different ways of interpreting the word.
Yeah, yeah.
Take your pick.
Right, right. So I'm that literarily it makes sense, and it's just as good of an explanation about it, and the fact that there's a vav after enav kama, and then lo yachol lirot could mean that it's two separate ideas that we're talking about. In other words, it could say his eyes were rigid or in concentration or focused, and he could not see. So one is not dependent on the other. They're two independent factors. So yes, you could read it that way. And that possibly could explain, maybe it's common for old people to be sitting by the road, and out of respect, if they're concentrating, younger people wouldn't bother them. Maybe, I don't know. Etiquette when it comes to older folks in different societies throughout the ages is different. So yeah, so Ron, your reading is an acceptable reading, and it could be a legitimate way to understand it. Okay,
Comma wasn't there originally, right?
say that again.
The comma wasn't there originally. That was
The word, no, so the word is ve'enav kama. It's a description.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not the
Hebrew
English
doesn't-
word comma.
But
No.
what I wanted to ask is, I'm sorry, I forgot. Whose decision was it to send the ark with the army? Was it Eli's?
No, the Israelites themselves. The Israelites just did it themselves.
Okay, so he didn't feel guilt for that.
No.
Okay, well, I'm just thinking, imagine if it was his idea or he said, take the ark.
No, he didn't. He did not tell them to take an ark.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now on 262, and he had judged Israel 40 years. This notice, with its use of the formulaic 40 years, is odd because Eli certainly has not been a judge, either in the military charismatic or the juridical sense. This sentence could be an attempt to establish a carryover from the book of Judges, or it could be an inadvertent editorial repetition of the Judges formula. Big with child, the Hebrew says literally was pregnant to give birth. She crouched down. In the ancient Near East, women generally gave birth in a kneeling position, leaning on a special birthstone. Examples have been uncovered by archaeologists called in Hebrew a mashber. So that's interesting too. So the mashber, oh, never mind. I was thinking of a different word. Mashber comes from shin bet resh, which means to break. So the birthing stone is called a mashber. So maybe the waters are breaking, whatever. Okay. Ikavod, glory is exiled. The Hebrew name is conventionally constructed to mean inglorious. And though Kyle McCarter Jr. has argued that the more probable meaning is, where is glory? Or alas for glory. In any case, it's a most peculiar name. The dying mother, overcome by the loss of the ark, which affects her much more than her husband's demise, inscribing the national catastrophe in her son's name. Where one must agree unhesitatingly with McCarter is that the verb in this sense, in this verse, and the next should be rendered as exiled, and not, as it is customarily translated, as departed. Exile is what it clearly denotes, and it is surely significant that this whole large sequence of stories that will provide an account of the founding of Israel's dynasty and the crystallization of its national power begins with a refrain of glory exiled from Israel. It is also noteworthy that the term for glory, kavod, is transparently cognate with kaved heavy, the adjective used to explain Eli's lethal tumble from his chair. The leader who might be supposed to represent Israel's glory exhibits only deadly heaviness. So I think that's a fascinating idea that the story of the start of the kingship, the dynasty in Israel begins with exile. So it begins with the ark being in exile. And then the whole story ends with the first temple being destroyed and us going into exile. So that's just it's a fascinating literary observation on Alter's part.
Remember?
Yes,
She is dying,
yes,
or she is, and she names the kid, her son, Ichabod. I mean, that's,
yes.
you know,
Well, it's like
I mean,
Rachel. Go ahead.
no, I'm just trying to, it seems like a pretty quick sequence of events that she's dying and she decides to name her son this.
Right, but if we look back in Genesis with Rachel giving birth to Benjamin, she calls him Ben-Oni, the son of my suffering. But Jacob calls him Benjamin. So there's a whole story there. Here, nobody's telling her in this story not to name him Ikavod or to name him a different name. In the Rachel, Benjamin, Jacob story, Rachel names him Ben-Oni. Jacob renames him Benjamin, and the name Benjamin sticks. So I only bring that up because there in that story, she's dying in childbirth and gives the son a bad name. Here, this unnamed wife of Pinchas names this son a bad name, but nobody's there to give him a different name, and we don't know if Ikavod is going to reappear in the story. Again, I don't remember all the details of Samuel to know if Ikavod is going to make an appearance. But like Alter says, it could be just a literary tool to just foreshadow for us the whole spiritual problem of the people of Israel, and that's a lack of respect and glory given to God. Right? Yes, Ron.
So Hoshea's children, I think he had 3 sons, and they all had awful names.
Yes, that's right. And
And for the
Isaiah
same reason.
is told to name his sons good names, but they're also like many, many words. Like it's in one of the Haftarahs, I forget which one, but it's like Pela Yoetz Gibor something. It's like 10 words. That's a positive name, but yes. Well, Hosea's whole life, he's supposed to marry a prostitute, have children with her, and his whole marriage and child rearing are supposed to be that's supposed to be the message of prophecy besides the words he shares with the people of Israel. So he has to live a life of what's it called? Not of infidelity. That's the word I was looking for. It has to live a life of infidelity besides preaching the infidelity of the people of Israel. Yes, so there we do have examples of that. So, but I'll say this about the life of the prophets: we have no idea if the prophets ever lived, and perhaps the books themselves, the books of prophets themselves, are meant to be metaphors and not to be real. So we don't know. We haven't, as far as I know, archaeological discoveries have not found the names of Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel. Now, it's possible Jeremiah had a scribe named Baruch ben Neriah, and I think that name was found in some discovery in Jerusalem. So, yeah, that could lend credence that Jeremiah existed, but we don't have proof. I mean, there are tombs in the land of Israel that have been designated as the tombs of the prophets, but we don't know for sure. Nobody's gone inside to see if the skeletons are there, to see if the prophets are actually buried there. Okay, so it's 10:22. So let's stop here as we're about to start chapter 5. I understand a couple people won't be here next Friday, but if we have a couple people still who are going to be here, we'll have class next Friday. But the following Friday, is the Friday during Pesach. So I'm not sure that we'll have class then. It all depends on, no, I guess, no, I think we probably will have class then, because I think there's going to be a minyan in the building at 8 o'clock that morning. So, yeah. So we'll have class for the next few weeks. Passover will not impact. But those who won't be here next week, Chag Kasher v'Sameach, happy kosher Passover, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.